Welcome to Text Readings with Greg Stafford. That's me. And what we do is progressively work our way through ancient biblical and other related texts and histories. Our goal is to try to find and to evaluate and study everything we can that reliably pertains to the God Jah. Because we've come to know the God Jah not only through the Bible, but through these other texts and events that are described and recorded by various ancient civilizations. Those who are written about in the Bible just being some of them. But the biblical text, in our view, represents one of, if not the most credible collection of ancient histories, specifically, again, as it pertains to what is written or what is said to have occurred in relation to the god Jah, as well as to other gods at different times in our human history. So it's a religious channel primarily, and these day text or text readings, as they're now called, are designed to further educate everybody who subscribed and who watches these videos about what the Bible teaches and about what other related texts and histories teach. So we try to look at everything, but we focus on the Bible. They used to be called day texts because we were trying to do them on a more regular or day basis. And even with set schedules during the week, if you watch some of our earlier videos, you'll see kind of how that was set up. But that was when we were doing certain New Testament letters and books that are, based on what I've translated today, much easier to present on a regular basis. We don't have to discuss as lengthy of sections as have been the case once we turned to Genesis. And so I changed it to text readings so that we would have more time to devote to each video for these longer sections in Genesis specifically. And then also for people to digest the material. We read the Greek and Hebrew translations. So, for example, in today's text reading of Genesis 9, 1 through 17, we're going to be reading 17 verses, but really it's 34 because it's the Greek and the Hebrew. So we compare them to see how they complement each other or contrast, or how they're expressively the same or different. In most cases, they're basically the same. Sometimes they're a little bit different. And if there's significant differences or additions or subtractions to the text itself between the two versions, the Greek and Hebrew, then you'll notice a minus or plus sign next to the G and H in my text, which we'll get to, that will indicate that there's a part in that translation that's either plus or minus over and against the other one. You'll see that in our first verse today, in fact, if you're following along with me. You're welcome to use whatever text you have or prefer. But we focus on the text primarily that I've done to date because that's what I know best. And so I'm able to comment on it to the extent that I hope will clarify what I'm trying to communicate, what I mean, what I think the text means, and of course, answer any questions you have, get into some of the details. If you watch our prior shows, you know we try to take specific aim at some of the more disputed or controversial details, but that upon examination, when you look at the most credible information, you can see that the text actually makes amazing sense, fits perfectly with all the events that we can show actually took place, or that we have good reasons to believe took place, essentially the way the Bible describes, all the way back to the first chapter of Genesis. So watch those videos if you'd like more information on the preceding sections of Genesis leading up to chapter 9. Now, if you've been following us, you know that in chapter 9, we're still basically in the period involving Noah and the flood, although it's right after the flood. And so Noah and his sons and those with him and all of the animals and flying types have come out of the ark or are coming out of the ark. And Yahuwah is going to address them. So let's go ahead and take a look at the material. I'll pull up the text that I'm going to be reading from the Great Message translation that I'm working on. Give you a moment to get there. And as you'll see in the first verse, Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, there's a minus sign next to the H for Hebrew, and then a plus next to the G for Greek. And while I'm not finished with my translation, even of these texts, I have to go over them and finalize things as I complete them, and then publish what I hope will be the first edition involving the book of Proverbs in a year or so. But I have to follow that same model complete the text, go over it, edit it where necessary, and then finalize any details. But essentially at this point, what I'm marking here is the difference in italics, the plus that you see here. So verse 1 just doesn't have this part, although it's consistent with what you read in the following verses, as well as with what we read in Genesis involving Adam and Eve. But it's more important that it's consistent with the text here, because any additions or changes in the text naturally catch people's attention. But for the most part, they're not that significant. Some are. And where they are, we'll discuss them. All right, now let's take a look at the text. Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, Hebrew translation. Then God began to bless Noah and his sons when he started to say to them, have offspring and become many in number and fill up the earth. Genesis 9:1 Greek translation, God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, you must increase and multiply and fill up the earth, and you must exercise authority over it. Verse 2, Hebrew translation, but a fear and a terror from you will come to be upon every animal of the earth, and upon every flyer of the sky heavens, in everything which crawls upon the ground, and in all fish of the sea. In your hands I have given them. Excuse me. Verse 2, Greek translation, the shaking fear from you, even terror, will come to be upon all the animals of the earth, and upon all the birds of the sky heaven, and upon all things moving upon the earth, and upon all the fish of the sea. Under your hands I have given them. Verse 3, Hebrew translation, every crawling creature which is alive is for you, to be for food, just like the green plant growth. I have given it to you entirely. Verse 3, Greek translation, every reptile which is living, it will be food to you. Like eatable plants of the grass, I have given them all to you. Verse 4, Hebrew translation. Verse 4 is basically the same in both. I'll read them briefly together. However, flesh with its life or soul, its blood, you are not to eat. However, meat with blood of life, you will not eat. So it's very clear here that in addition to the new allowance, since it had not yet been stated expressly that animals could serve as food, and whether or not they did or not prior to this, I can't say, but the declaration is new. It's not what Adam and Eve were told. And even after they sinned, as we know from the text, Yahweh, even though he had to slay animals to provide clothing for them because they were ashamed, they were the ones who brought that condition upon themselves that he had to help them with. Whether or not that then involved any kind of eating of animals, we don't know. But here it is definitely allowed, just like with the plant growth, only not with the blood. It's life, it's blood. So the animal had to be properly bled out. But it doesn't describe it in such a difficult manner that, you have to be so paranoid over getting every particle of blood out of the meat. Obviously it states it and that's it. Do your best, get the blood out, don't eat that. But you can eat this. And it's specific to eating. Transfusing blood as blood to continue serving as blood is not eating blood. It's basically an organ transplant. Eating blood does not allow it to serve as blood the way blood in a transfusion does. And I'm not arguing that transfusions are something you should do. That's something you should choose, just like I do, if I have to. But that's what the text teaches. Verse 5, Hebrew translation, indeed, also your blood which belongs to your lives or souls, I will find out about it. This is Yahweh talking to Noah and his sons. From the hand of every living animal I will find out about it, and from the hand of humankind or from the hand of man's brother I will find out about the life or soul of humankind. Verse 5, Greek translation, for the blood that is yours, which belongs to your lives, I will find out about it. From the hand of all animals I will find out about it. From the hand of a man's brother I will find out about the life of man. Verse 6, Hebrew translation, one who empties out blood from humankind. By humankind, that one's own blood will be emptied out. Because in a likeness of God, he has made humankind. Excuse me. Verse 6, Greek translation, the one who empties out blood from humankind exchanges his own blood, which will be emptied out. Because in an image of God, I made mankind. I'll take a brief drink here to keep my reading mouth hydrated and give us a chance to reflect on the last part of this text, because as you know, from what is stated here, Yahweh is basically making clear that if you kill another human made in his image, another human made in his image is going to kill you. And so, just like the way that Cain, when he killed Abel, and Yahweh found out about it because of the blood of Abel crying out, in the sense in which Yahweh knows that anytime his spirit leaves a human body, it comes back to him. So Cain then, of course, was very concerned about the punishment that would come upon him, and then was multiplied upon those who would take vengeance upon him. But in any case, Yahweh is making clear once again that if you spill the blood of humankind made in his image, that's who's going to spill your blood. Verse 7, Hebrew translation, but you must have offspring and increase in number and move about in large groups in the earth. Become numerous in it. Verse 7, Greek translation, but you must increase and multiply and fill up the earth. You must multiply upon it. Verse 8, Hebrew translation, then God began to speak to Noah and to his sons who were with him, saying, and similarly, verse 8, Greek translation, then God spoke to Noah and to his sons who were with him, saying, verse 9, Hebrew translation, now behold, I am demonstrating my agreement with you and with your offspring after you. Verse 9, Greek translation, behold, I am raising up my agreement with you and with your seed after you. Verse 10, Hebrew translation, even with every living soul, which is with you among the flyer, among the land animal, and among every living creature of the earth with you, from among all of those going out of the box vessel, according to every living creature of the earth. Verse 10, Greek translation, even with every living soul with you, from birds and from pack animals and with every wild animal of the earth, as many as are with you, from all of those coming out of the wooden box craft. Verse 11, Hebrew translation, so I have demonstrated my agreement with you. This is Yahweh talking to Noah and to his sons, that I will not again destroy all flesh by the floodwaters, and a flood will not occur again to damage the earth. Verse 11, Greek translation, I will stand up my agreement with you, and I will not again cause all flesh to die from the water of the cataclysm. And the cataclysm of water will not again be used to destroy all the earth. Verse 12, Hebrew translation, then God began to say, this is a sign of the agreement which I am setting between me and you and every living soul which is with you, to generations of future time. Verse 12, Greek translation, next, Lord God Yahweh said to Noah, this is the sign of the agreement which I set up between me and you and every living soul which is with you, into generations of future times. Verse 13, Hebrew translation, I have set my bow or curve in the cloud, and it has come to be for a sign of an agreement between me and the earth. Verse 13, Greek translation, I am placing my bow or curve in the cloud, and it will be for a sign of an agreement between me and the earth. Verse 14, Hebrew translation, when it has become the time in which I am to bring clouds over the earth, and the bow has appeared in the cloud. Verse 14, Greek translation, it will be during the time for me to collect clouds over the earth, that my bow will be seen in the cloud. Verse 15, Hebrew translation, when I have remembered my agreement which is between me and you and every living soul among all that is flesh, then the waters for a flood to damage all that is flesh will not keep coming. Verse 15, Greek translation, and I will be forced to remember my agreement, which is between me and you and every living soul among all flesh. And the water for the purpose of a cataclysm will not come about again, so as to erase all flesh. Verse 16, Hebrew translation, so the bow has come to be in the cloud, and when I have seen it, it will be to remember an agreement lasting into the future between God and every living soul among all that is flesh, which exists upon the earth. Verse 16, Greek translation, my bow will exist in the cloud, and I will see it to be reminded about the unending agreement between me and every living soul among all flesh, which is upon the earth. Verse 17, Hebrew translation, our last text, and then we'll go back and talk about a few things. Then God began to say to Noah, this is a sign of the agreement which I have demonstrated between me and all flesh, which exists upon the earth. Verse 17, Greek translation, next God said to Noah, this is the sign of the agreement which I made official between me and all flesh, which is upon the earth. All right, now we've talked about a couple of things that were significant from our reading or that stood out, and that is the relationship that is pronounced here between humans and animals. And we highlighted the fact that the express pronouncement that the animals could serve as food is different than what had been stated previously, and that the restriction involved the eating of blood, or the food with its life, its blood. But there was also a reference made to the terror or the fear that would exist now. And that was actually stated first, right? And it's in verse 2. And then it's almost like because of that new fear that they would have, because of the condition of humans after the flood, all the destruction which occurred, that Yahweh was now creating this situation so that, to control the development of humans and the earth so that it wouldn't reach that point again, similar with the confusion of languages likely, which we'll get to in chapter 11. But it seems to me that the connection between the terror or the fear between humans and animals and the eating of animals as food is clear, in that obviously if there's going to be that kind of fear and contention or likely fighting, right? If you're afraid of something, it usually involves some kind of battle or fight or defense or fence in order to stay alive against the thing you fear. And so that would likely then involve more animal death than may have occurred prior to this. And so that now that they would serve not only as clothes but as food, because now they would die more regularly because of the fear in them or between them. Just something to think about. And then we of course we highlight the fact that it prohibits the eating of the blood and the difference between that and transfusing blood. I did a whole show on that if you'd like more information. I've also written about it, so you can check the Topical Index if you'd like to see a video on the different teachings and issues involved with the use of blood as food or as blood. Now let's talk about rainbows. So today, as we know, the rainbow is often used by the homosexual or gay nation crowd, essentially as a way to reference their supposed inclusion, I guess, of all the different colors. There's a few colors missing there. Either way, the rainbow contains all the colors, or the light that is then refracted, as we'll see, through water droplets in order to create the appearance of the rainbow, can actually also appear white. But let's talk a little bit about the rainbow features, because everything we've talked about to this point and that Yahweh has declared can be shown to have the marks of intelligence. Now, when we talk about the rainbow, before we get into the details, the question I ask you to consider is, do you think this is the first time that any human had seen a rainbow? I don't think so, because rainbows can appear in a mist. And we know that prior to this, there was a mist. At least that's what the Bible describes. And that the rain that began the flood was the first time it had rained. So they probably, all the humans alive and animals, all the creatures, they associated the water that regularly gave drink, as the Bible describes. That's how it describes it, to the land and to the living types. When they saw the rainbow in the mist during the certain periods of day when the sunlight was bright, then they would naturally associate that bow with Jehovah, the one who is making all these things, bringing them to name, the animals to Adam and Eve to name, and then all these things that are occurring. So there was no doubt who was doing what and why, what it involved. And in any case, it would have been seen as an element of his creation, the mist. They would have associated it with a good thing that wasn't a danger to them. So I think that that's possibly, I'm not going to say for sure, of course, but it seems to me the way Jehovah talks here, he's basically saying my bow, it's almost like, you know, the bow, my bow. I'm going to put it up here in the clouds now. You've seen it down here with the mist, with the water that I allow. Now you're going to know when you see my bow in the clouds, and not only you, the humans, but it said specifically, even all the creatures of the earth, the flyer of the sky heaven, right? They're up there. So when the water starts coming down again, like it did during the flood, it's not just the humans that would be terrorized or afraid. It's the probably first and foremost the flyers of sky heaven, right? So when this bow appears, though, and everyone can see it in whatever means by which they associate it also with the mist that appeared, then that likely created a calming effect, which is here to this day. We see exactly what we're reading about right now. You can go create a rainbow, like I said, using a mist from a water hose and see what I'm talking about. It's a perfect time of day, at least where I am. In any case, I'm going to keep doing the show. And so let's just share a few points. I'll put a link to this article below. It's from the National Center for Atmospheric Research. You can read more about the organization as well using the links provided here. But let's see here. So we'll just read a couple parts. What is a rainbow? Author Donald Afrens, in his text Meteorology Today, describes a rainbow as one of the most spectacular light shows observed on Earth. Indeed, the traditional rainbow is sunlight spread out into its spectrum of colors and diverted to the eye by the observer by water droplets. The bow part of the word describes the fact that the rainbow is a group of nearly circular arcs of color, all having a common center. And so let's just take a look here. Where is the sun when you see a rainbow? This is a good question to start thinking about the physical process that gives rise to the rainbow. Most people have never noticed that the sun is always behind you when you face a rainbow. And that's what you'll see diagram down here below from a book by René Descartes. And many of you who watch my shows know we reference him when it comes to philosophies about life and whether we're in a dream state or being controlled by an evil demon. But he also did some other things as well. And so we'll get to that in a moment. And so, and that the center of the circular arc of the rainbow is in the direction opposite that of the sun. And then the rain, of course, is in the direction of the rainbow. All right. So this is where they cite a few things from René Descartes' book, including his drawing here. I'm not going to get into all the different representations of this drawing, but you can review it, and I encourage you to do so on your own because it's a fairly simple but effective drawing, which is why they're using it, from 1637, that shows exactly what happens and why we see rainbows. Okay, I'll skip the part where Descartes talks about his diagram here. You can read that on your own. But to simplify, I'm going to get to the part where we can simplify for this video and then give you the references. There's tons of information. Again, as I said in CWJah Talk 30, everything that exists shows intelligence. And we know that we're here and we can only come from existing life. So eternal intelligent life is whom we call Jah, and his marks are over everything. And that's who we're reading about, right? It's Jehovah telling Noah, you're going to see my bow. Not down here, but up here now. And everything alive is going to see it, just so you know. I won't do that again because of the damage it did and the way that it terrorized all living things. He had a right to. Jehovah didn't have to preserve anyone. He didn't have to make anything or anything like us or anything. He wanted to. And then he gave us the opportunity to choose what we wanted to. And the rest is history. So let's get to our period now, where we're talking about the physics of rainbows. And so let's read this section that simplifies it. And again, you can review the section up here with the diagram and kind of review that on your own in terms of how you see rainbows. But to simplify the analysis, consider the path of a ray of monochromatic light through a single spherical raindrop. Okay, so one raindrop. And we'll get to, and that's not an okay sign, by the way. I'm trying to make it a raindrop. All right, so we'll get to also the mathematics that are involved with the fall of a raindrop and how it really doesn't resemble, like sometimes you see a tear, but more like a dome because of the pressure of the air on the bottom and then the tension, strength of the drop on the top. But let's talk more about the light part of it here. So imagine how light is refracted. We're talking about one raindrop as it enters the raindrop. So again, outside of the entire rainstorm and the rainbow you normally see, let's just focus on one raindrop. All right, so imagine how light is refracted. That means it changes direction or bends as it enters the raindrop. Then how it is reflected by the internal curved mirror-like surface of the raindrop. So it goes in the raindrop, light bends, hits the inside internal curved mirror surface of the raindrop and is reflected, or finally how it is refracted as it emerges from the raindrop. So it's reflected, it's refracted, reflected, and then refracted again out of the raindrop. If we then apply the results for a single raindrop, so that whole process of light entering a raindrop, refracting or changing direction, hitting the internal curved mirror-like surface, reflecting, and then refracting and changing direction again as it exits the raindrop, if we then apply the results of that to a whole collection of raindrops in the sky, that's the rainbow. So it's all of those droplets uniformly working together to refract, reflect, and then refract again. The light that our eyes then take in, and through electrochemical impulses in our eyes, they send signals that are then interpreted by the brain as those colors. And so just talking about it, it makes you want all these things that just happen so easy for us, right? Rainbow. Oh, okay. Now you know. If you didn't already, a little bit more. It's pretty heavy because it requires such precision and uniformity and beauty. And we just read the story or the history about why it's in the sky. And so there's a little bit more here. You can read this on your own, as I mentioned. Let's see, there might be another point here we could share. So basically, you can, what makes the colors in the rainbow, we'll just read this last part. The traditional description of the rainbow is that it's made up of 7 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Actually, the rainbow is a whole continuum of colors from red to violet and even beyond the colors that the eye can see. So we've talked about this also in some of our earlier text reading or day text shows involving Genesis and the light that Jah said would come to be and did come to be before the sun, moon, and stars came to be. The sun, moon, and stars were then used to contain, or in the case of the moon, reflect what we see as light. But the light actually was made first by Jehovah, the electromagnetic spectrum. He generated that, just like he made this bow, or allows the light at this point, now that the rain is going to occur on a regular basis, so he has to let everyone know. Okay, when you see this is going to reflect, I'm going to refract this, reflect it, and refract it again so that you guys can see my bow, not down here, but way up here. If they ever, like I talked about earlier, had seen it in the mist, which seems like they would have. But not up in the clouds, which now was their concern, because those are what had given out the water that started the flood. Okay, so let's just take a look at one more article involving the shape of a raindrop. This is from NASA. I'll put a link below. We're not going to read the whole thing, but just wanted to show you again how the raindrop really doesn't resemble a tear like some people think, like you can see here where my cursor is, these are like side tiers. But it really is more flattened out and then becomes spherical as it gets smaller. So it says here, we'll just read this one paragraph. High in the atmosphere, water collects on dust and smoke particles in clouds. Raindrops start to form in a roughly spherical structure due to the surface tension of water. This surface tension is the skin of a body of water that makes the molecules stick together. The cause is the weak hydrogen bonds that occur between water molecules. On smaller raindrops, the surface tension is stronger than in larger raindrops or drops. The reason is the flow of air around the drop. As the raindrop falls, it loses that rounded shape. And so it says it becomes more like a hamburger bun. And then this last part here, airflow from the bottom of the water drop is greater than the airflow at the top. At the top, smaller air circulation disturbances create less air pressure. The surface tension at the top allows the raindrop to remain more spherical while the bottom gets more flattened out. And so it goes into the scientific formula of the raindrop further. You can review this on your own. But as I've said before, everything JahWah does shows the signs of intelligence. It's his intention. It's something he designed to do what it's doing, just like he told Noah he would do with his bow, and where he would show it whenever it would rain, like it did during the flood. Again, that it would stop, it wouldn't continue and damage the earth. So every time you see the rainbow, try not to think homo. If you're gay, that's fine. I mean, that's not what we practice here, and we don't discriminate against people, but we're not pro homo. We don't support abuse. So we don't support abusive relationships. We support normal heterosexual relationships, but we recognize that gayness is something people express, and it's legal in many places. So either way, if you're gay and you believe the rainbow is a symbol for what you promote, that's not what we believe, right? We use the rainbow for what it represents here in the text that we read today from Genesis 9, and you're allowed to view it however you want. And that's why I say to some people, when you look at things like Christmas or the use of different things that go back to certain, we'll say, pagan traditions, certain elements. Well, if homosexuals can use the rainbow to represent, gay pride, something obviously inconsistent with the teachings of JahWah and the things that he wants humans that he made and designed with normal reproductive functions. So if they're allowed to use that and have it represent something totally different than the ancient description given here in Genesis, well, then that should show you also that it's not the use of the symbol. It's what you mean by it. And for us, the rainbow is and always will be the sign of JahWah's agreement between him and all of us, all flesh, that he will never again damage the earth by means of a great flood.